The rain hammered down on the cracked pavement like 1,000 tiny drums, turning the world into a blur of gray and silver. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he hurried down Maple Street, his sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the dim glow of the streetlights above. It was nearly midnight, and the city felt abandoned, as if everyone else had the good sense to be somewhere warm and dry. He had just finished his shift at the warehouse, another grueling 12 hours of lifting boxes and loading trucks. His body ached, his clothes were damp with sweat and rain, and all he wanted was to collapse into bed. But as he rounded the corner near the old church, something made him stop. There, standing at the edge of the crosswalk, was an elderly woman, hunched over and trembling in the downpour. She wore a thin coat that looked decades old, and her white hair was plastered to her skull. She clutched a worn leather bag against her chest as if it contained something precious. The traffic light blinked red, then green, then red again, but she remained frozen to the curb, staring at the wet street as though it were an impassable ocean. Marcus felt something tug at his conscience. He was exhausted, soaking wet, and desperate to get home, but he couldn't just walk past her. His grandmother had raised him better than that. She had always told him that kindness was the one thing that cost nothing but meant everything. So despite every fiber of his being screaming for rest, he approached the old woman. "Excuse me," he said gently, raising his voice over the sound of the rain. "Do you need help crossing the street?" The woman turned to look at him, and Marcus felt his breath catch. Her eyes were in startling shade of pale blue, almost luminescent in the darkness, and they held a depth of sorrow that seemed to reach right into his chest. Her face was lined with 1,000 wrinkles, each one telling a story of years lived and hardships endured. But there was something else in those eyes, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was fear, raw and visceral, mixed with a strange kind of hope. "Would you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Would you really help me?" "Of course," Marcus replied, extending his arm. "Hey, take my hand. We'll go together." Her fingers were ice cold when they wrapped around his forearm, but her grip was surprisingly strong. Together, they stepped off the curb and into the street. The rain seemed to fall even harder, and Marcus had to squint to see the other side. As they walked, he noticed the woman was muttering something under her breath, words he couldn't quite make out. They sounded like a prayer, or perhaps a warning. When they reached the opposite sidewalk, Marcus expected her to let go and continue on her way, but instead, she held on tighter. She turned to face him fully, and in the glow of a nearby streetlight, he saw tears mixing with the rain on her weathered cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "You have no idea what you've just done. No idea at all." Before Marcus could respond, she reached into her leather bag and pulled out a small, tarnished key. It looked ancient, the kind of key that might open a chest in a fairy tale or a door in a castle. She pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it with both of her hands. "What's this for?" Marcus asked, confused and more than a little unsettled. The old woman looked over her shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. When she turned back to him, her eyes held an urgency that made his heart race. "Go to the address written on the tag," she said quickly. "Tomorrow morning, first thing. Don't tell anyone. Don't show anyone this key. And whatever you do, don't ignore this. Your life depends on it. My life depends on it. More lives than you can imagine depend on it." Marcus opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but she was already backing away, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her age. Within seconds, she had disappeared into an alley between two buildings, swallowed by the rain and the darkness. He stood there on the sidewalk, water streaming down his face, staring at the key in his hand. Attached to it was a small paper tag, protected by a plastic cover. Written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting was an address he didn't recognize, somewhere on the other side of the city. And beneath the address, just two words that made his blood run cold. Before midnight. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his small kitchen table, the mysterious key positioned under the harsh light of a bare bulb, studying it from every angle as if it might suddenly reveal its secrets. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a suffocating humidity that made his tiny apartment feel like a sauna. He kept replaying the encounter in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. The rational part of his brain screamed that this was absurd. Normal people didn't accept mysterious keys from strangers in the rain. Normal people didn't follow cryptic instructions to unknown addresses. But something about the desperation in that old woman's eyes, the genuine terror mixed with hope, made him feel that this was anything but normal. This was important. This was real. As dawn broke, painting his grimy windows with shades of orange and pink, Marcus made his decision. He would go to the address. He had to know what this was about, even if every instinct warned him he was walking into danger. He grabbed his phone, entered the address into his map application, and felt his stomach tighten when he saw the location. It was in the old industrial district, a part of town that had been dying slowly for decades. Abandoned factories, empty warehouses, and streets where decent people didn't venture without good reason. The bus ride took nearly an hour, carrying him through neighborhoods that grew progressively more rundown and forgotten. Marcus kept his hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the key, as if someone might try to snatch it away. The other passengers looked tired and defeated, people heading to menial jobs or coming home from night shifts. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody spoke. When he finally stepped off the bus, he found himself on a street lined with buildings that looked like they were slowly being reclaimed by nature. Weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalk, graffiti covered every available surface, and broken windows stared out like empty eye sockets. The address led him to a 4-story brick building that might have once been apartments or offices, but now looked like it should be condemned. The front door hung awkwardly on broken hinges, and Marcus slipped inside, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The interior was dim and smelled of mold and decay. Water stains bloomed across the walls like dark flowers, and his footsteps echoed in the emptiness. According to the tag on the key, he needed to find apartment 307. He climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The building groaned and creaked around him, as if the structure itself were in pain. On the 3rd floor, he found himself in a hallway with peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and surreal. Door 307 was at the end of the hall, distinguished from the others only by the numbers still visible through layers of grime. Marcus approached slowly, pulled out the key, and stared at the lock. This was it. This was the moment where he either turned around and went back to his normal life, or opened this door and stepped into something he didn't understand. The old woman's words echoed in his mind. Your life depends on it. He inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a heavy click that seemed impossibly loud in the silent hallway. Marcus pushed the door open and stepped inside, not knowing what to expect. What he found made him freeze in complete shock. The apartment was pristine. While the rest of the building was falling apart, this space looked like it belonged in a different world entirely. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and the hardwood floors gleamed as if they had just been polished. Antique furniture filled the room, each piece looking valuable and carefully maintained. Bookshelves lined every wall, packed with leather-bound volumes. A mahogany desk sat near the window, covered with papers and photographs. But it was what hung on the walls that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Black and white images from decades past, showing people, places, and events he vaguely recognized from history books. And in many of these photographs, standing among crowds or in the background of important moments, was the old woman from the rain. She looked exactly the same in pictures that had to be 50, 60, even 70 years old. Marcus moved closer to the desk, drawn by a large photograph positioned prominently at its center. It showed a group of people standing in front of what looked like a research facility. The caption beneath it read Project Kronos, 1952. And there, third from the left, was the old woman, looking no different than she had the night before. Next to the photograph was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. Marcus opened it with trembling hands and began to read. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1952, written in the same careful handwriting from the key's tag. As he read, the room seemed to spin around him, and he had to grip the edge of the desk to steady himself. The journal told an impossible story. The old woman's name was Eleanor Hartwell, and she had been a scientist working on a classified government project in the early 1950s. The project had been experimenting with something the journal called temporal manipulation. They had discovered a way to slow down aging, to stretch a normal human lifespan far beyond its natural limits. Eleanor had been one of the first test subjects, volunteering herself in the name of science. The experiment had worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams, or darkest nightmares. Marcus flipped through page after page, reading Eleanor's account of watching the decades pass while barely aging herself. She described the loneliness of outliving everyone she loved, the burden of carrying secrets that could never be shared, and the gradual realization that what she had thought was a gift was actually a curse. But as he neared the more recent entries, the tone changed from melancholy to urgent, from philosophical to frightened. Someone was looking for her. Someone who knew what she was, what she had been part of all those years ago. And they wanted what she had, the secret to her longevity, no matter what it cost. Marcus read deep into the afternoon, unable to tear himself away from Eleanor's journal. Each page revealed more about a world he had never known existed, a shadow history that ran parallel to the official version taught in schools. The journal entries became increasingly desperate as they approached the present day, documenting Eleanor's growing paranoia and her elaborate attempts to stay hidden. According to her writings, Project Kronos had been shut down in 1955 after a catastrophic incident that killed 3 researchers and nearly destroyed the entire facility. The government had buried all records of the project, dispersed the surviving scientists, and classified everything under the highest levels of secrecy. Eleanor had been given a new identity and a substantial sum of money with strict instructions to disappear and never speak of what had happened. For decades, she had complied. She moved from city to city, never staying anywhere longer than 5 years, changing her name and her appearance as much as possible. She watched the world transform around her, so technology advanced in ways that would have seemed like magic to her younger self. She lived in the margins of society, taking odd jobs, avoiding any situation that might require official documentation that could expose her impossible age. But 6 months ago, everything had changed. She started noticing people following her, vehicles parked outside her apartment for hours at a time, strangers asking neighbors questions about her. At first, she thought she was imagining things, that the decades of paranoia had finally broken her mind. Then she found the listening devices planted in her apartment, and she knew they had found her. Marcus turned to a page marked with a red ribbon, dated just 3 days before their encounter. Eleanor's handwriting was shaky here, almost frantic, so different from the careful script of earlier entries that it was hard to believe the same person had written it. "They know where I am," she had written. "I saw him today, the man in the gray suit, the same one from the photographs of the facility. But that's impossible. Those photographs are 70 years old, and he looks exactly the same. My God, there were others, other test subjects they never told me about. And if it's still alive, still young, then has had all these decades to build power, to position himself, to wait for the right moment to take what he wants. He wants the formula, the original serum, and he thinks I still have it. He's wrong, but he won't believe me. I have to hide it, the only thing they really want. I have to find someone who can get it to the right people, someone they won't suspect, someone random and unconnected to any of this." The entry ended there, but tucked between the pages was a folded piece of paper. Marcus opened it with shaking hands and found a hand-drawn map. It showed the building he was currently in, with a path marked in red ink that led from apartment 307 down to the basement, and then to what appeared to be a hidden room behind the boiler. Written at the bottom were instructions, "For the person with the key. What you find in the hidden room is the only proof that Project Kronos existed. Take it to Dr. Sarah Chen at the Institute for Medical Research. She's the only one I trust. Tell her Eleanor Hartwell sent you. Tell her it's time to expose the truth." Marcus sat back in the chair, his mind racing. This was insane. The story was impossible. People didn't live for over 70 years without aging. Secret government projects that defied the laws of nature only existed in movies. But here he was, surrounded by evidence that contradicted everything he thought he knew about reality. The photograph on the walls, the journal entries spanning decades in the same handwriting, the pristine apartment hidden inside a derelict building, it all pointed to the impossible being true. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. A black sedan was parked across from the building, one he hadn't noticed when he arrived. As he watched, a man stepped out of the car. He wore a gray suit that looked expensive even from 3 stories up, and he moved with the confidence of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. The man looked directly up at the window where Marcus stood, and even from this distance, Marcus could feel the weight of his gaze. It was predatory, calculating, and utterly cold. Marcus jumped back from the window, his heart hammering. They were here. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, they had found this place, which meant they had been following Eleanor, and probably had been following him since he left his apartment that morning. He was already involved in this, already caught up in something dangerous that he didn't fully understand. He had two choices. He could leave right now, walk out the front door, tell the man in the gray suit that he knew nothing, that he was just a random guy who helped an old lady cross the street. Maybe they would believe him. Maybe they would let him go back to his ordinary life. But even as a thought crossed his mind, Marcus knew it was fantasy. These people, whoever they were, didn't leave loose ends. They had already seen him enter the building with the key. They knew he had access to whatever Eleanor had hidden here. His only real option was to find what Eleanor had left in the basement, get it out of this building somehow, and deliver it to this Dr. Chen. It was insane and dangerous, but it was also the only thing that made sense. Eleanor had chosen him for a reason, had trusted him with this key because she had no one else. And after reading her journal, after understanding the loneliness and fear she had endured for decades, Marcus felt a responsibility he couldn't explain to honor that trust. He grabbed the journal and the map, stuffed them inside his jacket, and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he took one last look around the apartment, this strange capsule of a life that had stretched far beyond its natural span. He noticed something he had missed before, a small photograph on the mantel, different from all the others. It showed a young Eleanor, maybe 20 years old, laughing with a young man in a military uniform. They looked happy and in love, frozen in a moment of pure joy. Marcus wondered what had happened to that young man, how Eleanor had dealt with watching him grow old and die while she remained unchanged. The tragedy of it hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a gift. It was a nightmare dressed up as a miracle. And somewhere out there, someone wanted to recreate that nightmare, to use whatever knowledge Eleanor possessed for their own purposes. Marcus couldn't let that happen. Whatever was hidden in that basement, he had to get it to someone who could expose the truth, who could make sure this kind of experiment never happened again. He opened the door slowly, checking the hallway in both directions. It was still empty, but he could hear footsteps echoing up the stairwell, more than one person, moving with purpose. They were coming. Marcus turned toward the back stairs that the map indicated would lead to the basement. He ran. The back stairwell was even more decrepit than the front, with sections of the railing missing entirely and steps that felt disturbingly soft under Marcus's feet. He descended as quickly as he dared, one hand on the wall for balance, the other clutching the journal and map inside his jacket. Behind him, he heard doors being kicked open, voices shouting commands. They were searching floor by floor, and it was only a matter of time before they realized where he was headed. The basement was a maze of darkness and decay. Marcus pulled out his phone and activated the flashlight, sweeping the weak beam across pipes that dripped with condensation, walls covered in a furry growth that might have been mold or something worse, and a floor that was slick with moisture. The air was thick and hard to breathe, tasting of rust and chemicals and rot. According to Eleanor's map, he needed to find the boiler room, then locate a section of wall behind the old furnace that would reveal the hidden room. He moved through the basement as quickly as possible, trying to stay oriented in the labyrinth of corridors and storage spaces. Every sound made him jump, his nerves stretched to the breaking point. He passed rooms filled with broken furniture, others stacked with boxes that had disintegrated into pulp, and one that contained what looked like old medical equipment covered in dust and rust. That room made him pause, wondering if this building had once been some kind of clinic or hospital, if maybe Eleanor had chosen it specifically because of its history. Finally, he found the boiler room. The massive furnace sat in the center, a rusted monster that probably hadn't functioned in decades. Marcus consulted the map, holding his phone close to the paper. The hidden room should be behind the furnace, in the northeast corner. He squeezed around the furnace, his clothes catching on sharp edges and leaving fabric behind. The wall in the corner looked solid, just old brick and crumbling mortar like everything else. But Eleanor's map showed a specific brick, third from the bottom, 7 from the left, that would trigger the opening mechanism. Marcus found the brick and pressed it. Nothing happened. He pressed harder, feeling panic rise in his chest. What if the mechanism had broken over time? What if this was all for nothing? Then he remembered something from the journal, an entry about how the hiding place had been designed by an old friend who specialized in security systems during the Cold War. The mechanism would need pressure applied in a specific pattern. He pressed a brick 3 times quickly, then once with sustained pressure. A section of the wall swung inward with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. Behind it was a room, no more than 6 feet square, but clean and dry. In the center of this room sat a metal safe, military-grade by the look of it, with a combination lock that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. Marcus felt his hope deflate. He didn't have the combination. There was no way he could open this safe without the code. But then he saw it, taped to the top of the safe, a small envelope with his name on it. Not just to whoever finds this, but his actual name, Marcus Bennett, written in Eleanor's careful script. His hands shook as he opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. Marcus, it began, and seeing his name in her handwriting sent a chill down his spine. If you're reading this, then you didn't ignore my warning. You came to the apartment, found my journal, and followed the map to this room. That tells me I was right to trust you. That tells me you're the kind of person who helps an old woman cross the street in the rain, even when you're exhausted and soaked and desperate to get home. The world needs more people like you. I know this is overwhelming. I know you probably think you stumbled into a nightmare. But you're also the only hope I have, the only hope any of us have, that the truth about Project Kronos will finally come to light. In this safe is a last remaining sample of the original serum, along with all the documentation proving what the government did to us. It's evidence that could rewrite history, that could expose how far those in power will go to play God with human life. The combination to the safe is your birthday. Yes, Marcus, I know when you were born. I've been watching you for 3 weeks, ever since I moved into your neighborhood. I needed to find someone trustworthy, someone with no connections to the intelligence community or the military or the corporations that would love to get their hands on this technology. I needed someone ordinary, someone good, someone who would do the right thing even when it was hard. You helped that little girl find a mother in the grocery store last Tuesday. You gave your umbrella to that homeless man during the storm last week. You're exactly the person I need you to be. Once you have the contents of the safe, leave through the old maintenance tunnel. The entrance is behind the safe, hidden by a false panel. It will lead you to an exit 3 blocks from here, in the basement of an abandoned restaurant. From there, you need to get to Dr. Sarah Chen. Her office is at the Institute for Medical Research on the north side of the city. Give her everything. Tell her I'm sorry I waited so long, but I was afraid. Tell her that the man in the gray suit is James Sullivan, another Project Kronos subject, and has been building a pharmaceutical empire for the last 40 years with the intention of bringing the program back. Tell her everything has to come to light now, before he finds me, before he silences a last voice that can tell the truth about what they did to us. And Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for dragging you into this. But I had no choice. When you're as old as I am, when you've seen what I've seen, you learn that sometimes the only way to fix the world is to burden someone else with the weight of knowledge they never asked for. You'll understand one day, though I hope you never have to live as long as I have to truly comprehend the curse of too much time. Thank you for your kindness to a stranger in the rain. Thank you for being brave enough to follow where this led. And thank you for being the good person I knew you were the moment I saw you walking down that street. The world is darker than you know, but it's also brighter because people like you are in it. The letter was signed simply Eleanor, with a small postscript. The combination is 09/14/1992. Your mother would be proud of who you've become. Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. How did she know his mother had died? How did she know his birthday, his full name, the small act of kindness he thought no one had noticed? The level of surveillance, of research she had done on him, should have felt invasive, creepy even. But instead, it made him feel seen in a way he hadn't been since his grandmother passed away 5 years ago. Eleanor had chosen him carefully, had trusted him with something more important than he could have imagined. He entered the combination with steady fingers. The lock clicked, and the safe door swung open. Inside was a small refrigerated case, still humming with power from some hidden source. Within the case was a vial filled with a liquid that glowed faintly blue like captured starlight. Next to it was a thick folder bulging with documents, photographs, and what looked like scientific formulas. This was it, This was a proof that Project Kronos had existed, the evidence that could bring down powerful people and expose a secret that had been buried for 7 decades. Marcus carefully removed everything from the safe and loaded it into his backpack. As he did, he heard voices in the basement, much closer now. They had figured out where he was headed. He had minutes at best before they found the boiler room. He pushed on the panel behind the safe, and it swung open to reveal a narrow tunnel lined with ancient brick. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped inside and pulled the panel closed behind him. The darkness was absolute, pressing against him like a physical thing. He fumbled for his phone, but his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Finally, he managed to get the flashlight on, and he began to run through the tunnel, hunched over to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling, praying that Eleanor's map was accurate and that this tunnel really would lead him to safety. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a claustrophobic nightmare of crumbling brick and standing water. Marcus splashed through puddles, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the backpack heavy on his shoulders with its impossible cargo. Behind him, faintly, he could hear sounds of pursuit. They had found the hidden room, discovered the tunnel entrance. They were coming. The tunnel finally ended at a rusted metal ladder leading upward. Marcus climbed, his muscles boning, until he reached a trapdoor. He pushed against it with all his strength, and it gave way with a groan, opening into what appeared to be the kitchen of an abandoned restaurant, exactly as Eleanor had described. Gray light filtered through grime-covered windows, and Marcus realized with shock that evening was approaching. He had been in that building for hours. He emerged into an alley, closed a trapdoor behind him, and pulled a dumpster over it to buy himself a few more minutes. Then he ran. He ran through alleys and side streets, avoiding main roads, constantly checking over his shoulder for the black sedan or the man in the gray suit. His lungs felt like they were on fire. His legs threatened to give out, but the weight of the backpack and the memory of Eleanor's letter kept him moving. It took him nearly 2 hours of running, walking, and taking random bus routes to make sure he wasn't followed before Marcus finally stood outside the Institute for Medical Research. It was an impressive building, all glass and steel, the kind of place where important people did important work. Marcus looked down at his dirty, torn clothes and laughed bitterly. He looked like a homeless person, and he was about to walk into this pristine building carrying evidence of a government conspiracy that supposedly didn't exist. But he had come too far to turn back now. He walked through the front doors, past a security guard who looked at him with suspicion, and approached the reception desk. "I need to see Dr. Sarah Chen," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's urgent." The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and an expression that suggested she dealt with crazy people regularly, gave him a once-over. "Dr. Chen is in a meeting. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but please, just tell her that Eleanor Hartwell sent me. Tell her it's about Project Kronos. She'll understand." The receptionist's expression shifted from dismissive to uncertain. "Wait here," she said, picking up a phone and speaking in low tones. Marcus waited, every second feeling like an eternity, expecting at any moment to see the man in the gray suit walk through the doors. Finally, the receptionist hung up and looked at him with new eyes that held curiosity and perhaps a little fear. "Dr. Chen will see you immediately. 6th floor. Take the elevator on the right. She'll meet you there." The elevator ride felt surreal, watching the floors tick by while his reflection in the polished metal doors showed a man who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. When the doors opened on the 6th floor, a woman in her 50s was waiting. She had intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, and her expression was a mixture of anticipation and dread. "You mentioned Eleanor Hartwell," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "Where is she? Is she alive?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "She gave me a key 3 nights ago, told me to come to an address, and I found her apartment, her journal, and this." He unslung the backpack carefully. "She said you were the only person she trusted to handle what's inside. She said you would know what to do with it." Dr. Chen led him quickly to her office, locked the door behind them, and closed all the blinds. Only then did she turn to him, her hand shaking slightly. "I've been waiting 30 years for this," she whispered. "Eleanor and I worked together at the beginning of my career. She was using a different name then, but I figured out who she really was. What she really was. She made me promise never to tell anyone, but she also made me promise that if she ever found the courage to expose the truth, I would help her. Show me what you have. Marcus carefully removed the refrigerated case and the folder from his backpack. Dr. Chen gasped when she saw the glowing vial, and tears began streaming down her face as she opened the folder and started reading through the documents. My God, she breathed. This is everything. Test results, experiment logs, the original formula, photographs of the subjects. Do you understand what this means? This proves that the government was experimenting with life extension in the 1950s, that they succeeded, and that they've been covering it up ever since. This changes everything we know about biology, about ethics, about the lies we've been told. She looked up at Marcus, and he saw a fierce determination in her eyes. There are people who will kill to keep this secret buried, people with enormous power and resources. But I have connections to journalists I trust, scientists who can verify this evidence, lawyers who specialize in whistleblower protection. We can expose this. We can finally bring the truth to light. Over the next several hours, Dr. Chen made phone calls, sent encrypted messages, and arranged for the evidence to be duplicated and distributed to multiple secure locations. She explained to Marcus that he would need protection, that his life had changed the moment he helped Eleanor cross that street. She offered him a place to stay, security arrangements, and a lawyer who could help him navigate what was coming. As night fell over the city, Marcus stood at Dr. Chen's office window, looking out at the lights below. Somewhere out there, Eleanor was either hiding or had been captured. Somewhere out there, powerful people were probably realizing that their secret was about to become public. And here he was, an ordinary guy who had just wanted to help someone cross the street in the rain, now at the center of a storm that would shake the foundations of science and government. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against his better judgment, Marcus answered. Hello, Marcus. The voice was smooth, cultured, and completely devoid of warmth. The voice of the man in the gray suit. Marcus knew instinctively. You've been very busy today. Very brave. Very foolish. Who are you? Marcus demanded. Someone who has lived a very long time and learned to be patient. But even my patience has limits. You have something that belongs to me. Return it, and I promise you'll live out your natural lifespan in comfort. Refuse, and you'll discover that there are fates worse than death. Marcus looked at Dr. Chen, who was watching him with concern. He thought about Eleanor, about the loneliness and fear she had endured for decades. He thought about all the people who might suffer if this technology fell into the wrong hands, if life extension became a tool for the powerful to consolidate their control forever. Eleanor was right about you, Marcus said quietly. You don't want this for humanity. You want it for yourself, to build an empire that never ends. But here's what you don't understand. I'm not special. I'm not brave. I'm just someone who helps old ladies cross the street. And because I'm nobody special, because I'm just an ordinary person who happened to be in the right place at the right time, you can't threaten me into silence. The evidence is already out. Multiple copies, multiple locations, people who can't be bought or scared. It's over. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, softly, nothing is ever over, Marcus. I've been playing this game for 70 years. I can wait. And when the time is right, when you've let your guard down, when you think you're safe, I'll be there, because unlike you, I have all the time in the world. The line went dead. Marcus set down the phone and found that his hands were steady, his heart calm. He had done what Eleanor asked. He had gotten the truth to someone who could use it. Whatever came next, whatever consequences he faced, he had done the right thing. Dr. Chen put a hand on his shoulder. The story will break tomorrow morning. Simultaneously in 5 major newspapers, 3 scientific journals, and through secure channels to oversight committees. By this time tomorrow, the whole world will know about Project Kronos. Eleanor's courage, and yours, will change history. Marcus nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about an old woman in the rain, about the weight of secrets carried for lifetimes, about the price of immortality and the value of a single act of kindness. He had helped someone cross the street, and in doing so, had crossed the threshold himself into a world more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. Somewhere in the city, Eleanor was either free or captured, alive or dead. Marcus hoped she was safe, hoped she could finally rest after her decades of running. And he hoped that when the truth came out, When the world learned about the impossible life she had lived and the courage it took to expose it, people would understand that some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and that the longest life means nothing if it's lived in fear. The city lights glowed below like stars brought down to earth, and Marcus wondered what tomorrow would bring. What world would emerge when the truth could no longer be buried? But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel something he suspected Eleanor hadn't felt in a very long time: hope.